So we start our program right here in Canada with someone who's been getting nearly as much airtime as Ron McLean or Connor McDavid probably on the Print Inc. He's really become our go-to guru for all things food economy in Canada, from Buttergate to food price inflation. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois is a professor in food distribution and policy in the Faculties of Management and Agriculture at Dalhousie University in Halifax. He's also the Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab, which is also located at Dalhousie University. He's known as the Food Professor, and his current research lies in the broad area of food distribution, food security, and of course, food safety. He's one of the world's most quoted scholars in food supply chain management, food value chains, and traceability. And his research, of course, has been featured in newspapers and media groups nationally and internationally. He's very busy, and we're glad he could take time to join us today. He's been on parliamentary committees and asked as an expert witness there. He's been asked to be an food advisor on agricultural policies in many Canadian provinces and in other countries. So we're very pleased that Dr. Sylvain joins us to share insights on this ever-changing Canadian food industry, the agri-food world, and of course the consumers it serves, which all impacts agriculture and what happens on the farm. So with that, let's welcome Dr. Sylvain.
Oh, thank you very much, Diane. I'm very, very thankful for being invited to join you guys this morning. Honestly, a lot is going on. People are concerned about a lot of things, but there's a lot of good things happening as well. And so I think we need to pause a little and celebrate some of the things that we've seen from the food industry, from farm to fork. As an observer, I've been absolutely in awe with what I've seen over the last little while. I mean, Mother Nature has thrown us heat domes, droughts. We had we had floods in BC. A lot of things have happened, and of course the pandemic, which seems not to go away. A lot of the things that are happening still, the food industry is delivering, executing, we're growing, we're processing, we're distributing, we're still making Canada food secure. So I do want to thank you if you are a farmer out there, or a processor, or an ingredient provider or supplier. Thank you for the job that you're doing, because at the end of the day, it's all about feeding Canadians, and Canadians are very thankful, even though prices are going up. Yes, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Still, Canadians are quite thankful for having access to healthy, safe food. And by the way, if you look at the recent UN ranking of countries when it comes to food safety, Canada is now the #1 country in the world. We provide the safest food in the world. Yeah, it's not the Stanley Cup, but hey, we're getting there. So before I go into, so I was asked to talk about, the protein wars, what's going on with protein in general, and proteins are a big piece of what we eat. I just want to let you know that we have a podcast. It's called The Food Professor. It's available on Spotify, Apple, also Google, and Simplecast. If you can actually just go, we have guests every single week. We try food. We talk about issues going on across the country. Myself and Michael LeBlanc, who is based out of Toronto. Every week we talk about different issues, and of course the issue of proteins comes up all the time. And so we've been trying some plant-based products here and there. We're always sent food to try for our podcast. No sponsorships. We don't accept sponsorship, but it's a lot of fun. So if you have a product out there you want us to try on our podcast, please don't hesitate to contact us. And also I wanted to let you guys know that all of our research is actually available on our website. You just Google Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, and you'll have access to all of our studies for free in both English and French. So just so you know, and all of the data that I'm going to give you today, you can actually have it on our website as well. So let's talk about the big topic of the day. And as you probably know, today, this morning, StatsCan came out with its CPI report for November. And we saw that the inflation rate in Canada is at 4.7%. And yes, the food inflation rate is close to 5% now, the highest rate since January 2015. Now, people are noticing, and last week you may have heard that we actually released Canada's Food Price Report 2022, and we are predicting a very, very challenging year for consumers, 5 to 7%. So, for an average family of four, the food bill will actually increase by about $900, 900 to $1,000 for family four. So it's a lot of money. Uh, is it of course it's unfortunate, especially for families with less means, and the inflation rate is actually going up at a very at a it is quite high. It's a higher rate, and of course wages aren't following. Food affordability is challenging Canada. The UN, according to the UN, once again, Canada in 2020, last year, Canada was ranked 18th in the world when it came to food affordability. We're down to 24th now this year. And we are expecting Canada to drop even further in that ranking, even though we produce a lot of food in Canada. So I know when I meet farmers, I mean, we grow a lot of food, but we do grow a lot of food for the world, not just for Canadians. That's the thing. A lot of people out there are concerned about food prices, but it's not necessarily just a bad thing. I've always believed that in Canada we get a pretty good deal at the grocery store, and obviously media will communicate to the public that prices are going up. It's awful, and of course it is awful for people who actually are living in food insecurity. However, in some way, when you have a society valuing food, when you have a society paying more for food, you end up looking at consumers who will have a very different relationship with food in general. Look at Europe. The average household in Europe will spend 15 to 17% of its budget on food. And everyone who's been to Europe would know that the relationship with food is very different than, say, in America, where in the United States, the average household will spend 6.1% on food. So food is competing against, that next TV, that next car, or that trip to Mexico, or it's societies that tend not to spend as much on food will marginalize food a little bit more. Canada right now is in the world of the in-betweens, basically. So we're starting to kind of depart from that era of cheap food. And that's been happening for the last 10 years. It's not overnight. The pandemic just accelerated everything. But I do believe that right now what we're seeing is a complete departure from this era of cheap food, and people are asked to buy food differently. It's kind of like in the 70s without the oil crisis, essentially. I remember when I was a young kid with my mom, we bought everything on special. Like everything was on special, but the quality of food was not good either. I mean, we thought Cheese Whiz was actually cheese. I mean, that's just not this. We're not there anymore. People are expecting different things, and that's why I actually feel quite optimistic about the future, because all of a sudden you have this amount of wealth going back into the system, the food industry, to provide higher quality, more variety, and safe foods as well. And as I told you earlier on safety, Canada is doing very well, and that comes at a cost. So there's lots of things that are happening that I think are quite positive. But let's look at specifically at proteins in general. Now, the one thing that the pandemic has done, I think, is that it really has pushed people to not only appreciate the transparency of the supply chain, but also how the supply chain actually works. And I've never said the word supply chain so often in the last 2 years. That's what I've studied as a PhD student. And for the first time, people were actually concerned about where their food was coming from, actually concerned about access. When BC floods happened, they were wondering, are we going to get food? Are processors going to get food? Who are who are the people involved? People are concerned about the quality of life of workers. And that's why you're seeing more strikes out there, labor disputes. Nabisco was on strike, Kellogg's was on strike, Excel d'Or in Quebec. High River came close to a strike too. And why? And they settled for 21% over several years. Employees have more political climate because people are more attentive to how things work, which is really a good thing. Which it has really opened things up, I think, for the entire supply chain, which is, I think, a very good thing. But when it comes to proteins, it does really raise questions. For example, how animals are raised, the ethical treatment of animals, the environment. There's lots of noise out there all over the place. Some groups are saying this, some groups are saying that. Consumers are quite confused. And of course, at the end of the day, they're looking at different products at the grocery store, wondering what's right, what's wrong. So I actually think that we're just about to start, and this was in our report last week. We're about to start plant-based 2.0, I guess, and the 1.0 was basically was led by Beyond Meat. I think everyone knows the company. I think we owe a lot to Beyond Meat. They've actually convinced me as well that producing plant-based products is actually scalable, which is something I never thought would happen. But they did prove it. Now they are struggling, I think, because their stock price is actually below the IPO they had a few years ago. It's a sign that really the brand is struggling, but not plant-based products. Sales are actually still going up in the country. But Beyond Meat's mistake, and I've said that many times, is that it was infatuated with the concept of comparing itself with the real thing, beef and pork and other products. And frankly, I've always believed that if you're a meat fan, you eat meat. If you want to do something else, you try something else, which is why I've never been comfortable with the term plant-based. In plant-based 2.0, I actually think that the plant-based term will slowly fade away. If you talk to ranchers, they'll say, well, meat is plant-based, isn't it? Well, to a certain extent, they're right. So I actually think that the language will start evolving. The nomenclature of the category will become more like vegetable proteins, because that's what they are, like lentils, chickpeas. And so we'll talk about animal proteins and vegetable proteins, and both have tremendous potential. And this is really what needs to happen more and more in this plant-based vegetable protein 2.0 era, is to recognize that protein democracy is so valuable for consumers. Consumers, I mean, when you look at the data, 91% of Canadians still eat meat on a regular basis. I mean, Canadians aren't walking away from the meat counter. They are reducing the amount of meat they eat. In fact, 53%, we actually ran a survey recently, and 53% of Canadians are actually planning over the next 12 months to reduce the amount of meat they consume. But they're not getting rid of it from their diets. They're still going to keep on buying meat products because Canadians enjoy meat. Once in a while, they may actually go for seafood. They may actually go for vegetable proteins, and that's quite all right. That's really, I think, what's going to happen likely in the near future. A lot of people have actually talked about the vegan movement, how big it is. They're annoying, blah blah blah. Some vegans are annoying, yes, but not all of them. I'm not sure if you know how many vegans are there in Canada. We actually believe that there are anywhere between 400 to 500,000 vegans in Canada. And the numbers haven't gone up all that much in the last 5 years. Veganism is a commitment. I mean, it's a huge commitment. So there is a vocal minority that is annoying on social media, and frankly, I don't think it resembles to the vegans I know in my life. But vegans are really influential. They will actually say, for example, if you're an omnivore like I am, and you want to try a vegan dish, first thing I'll do is I'll ask a vegan friend, what do you eat, and how do you prepare it, and all that. And so there's a different dialogue going on around veganism, I think, because before they were marginalized, and now they're much more included in the conversation. And you also have pescatarians, you have flexitarians, you have all sorts of people interested in different diets. And we need to appreciate the fact that people have choice, which is great. Um, and so that's one thing that really will matter. And the thing that really will get people to consider vegetable proteins, well, I would say there are four things. One, price. Let's face it, 2021 was a spook year for people who go to the meat counter. I mean, I love meat, but buying steak is expensive now compared to last year. Some cuts are up 20%, and people have noticed. Pork is up maybe 5%, but chicken is up 13, 14% since January. So those are a huge jump, and people, are concerned about prices in general. And even though vegetable proteins are still somewhat a little bit more expensive, the processed products, they're becoming that margin, that differential between the two categories is actually getting smaller and smaller, especially in the dairy section. Now, oat beverages are pretty much the same price as fluid milk now in most provinces. So you can see that really scalability is having an impact on prices overall, which is something that consumers are noticing more and more. So yeah, absolutely. There's that. There's health, and the health one is confusing because there are some studies suggesting that, well, if you eat plant-based, if you eat vegetable protein, it's better for you. If you eat meat, there's still a lot of confusion out there. A lot of people are asking questions. The bottom line is that people will get more information. And the other thing is that the food guide that we have now, which is 2 years old, really, really promotes vegetable proteins a lot, but it doesn't really put aside animal proteins. It's just vegetable proteins are much more prominent in that guide, and people are reading it. The food guide is being institutionalized now. 2 years in, I'm often asked to talk to kids in schools. People are aware. I mean, the 4 food groups are long gone now. They don't even talk about meat and substitutes. They don't talk about dairy. They talk about proportions, and and this is the reality. So you have to think about the next generation. If you're out there and you are skeptical about this vegetable protein movement, it's real. We see it in our numbers, especially with the younger generations. Anybody under the age of 40 will absolutely have a different approach to proteins, generally speaking. And the fact that people are actually going to be spending more time at home over the next little while, that's also going to be a huge factor as well. People will have time to think about, the environment, health, animal welfare. So those are factors that really matters a lot. This animal welfare is one that we're watching very closely. Okay, and here's the reason why. Since the start of the pandemic, okay, in Canada, we have over 3 million new pet owners in Canada. Pet owners, 3 million. That's the population of Montreal. Okay, that's close to the population of Vancouver. That's a lot of people. And if you're a dog owner, if you're a cat owner, if you're a pet owner out there, I'm sure you'll recognize that your relationship with animals changes a little bit. you care for your pet. 95% of Canadians actually consider their pet as a member of their family. Okay. So it's pretty deep. And so that transformation will have an impact on how people see the livestock industry, I think, over time. And so that's something you want to keep an eye on as much as possible. And the environment, of course, the environment is a big issue. We're talking a lot about the environment over the last little while, and that's not going to fade away. Canadians will actually want to see their planet on their dinner plates. They'll actually make decisions based on what's best for them and the planet. They want to become better environmental stewards, as farmers are as well. So those are things that really we're seeing. In our survey, what we saw also, females, women are more likely to buy vegetable proteins than men. I think that's not surprising, obviously. 62% versus 51%. 70% of millennials and generations have actually consumed a vegetable protein based product in the last month in Canada. 70%, 70. So this is that those generations, the younger ones. Okay, and by the way, the millennials are 42 years old or younger now. Most of them have kids. And so, and they're going to be influencing kids in how to eat, and they'll do different things. Like I said, they're not giving up on meat, but they are looking also at other options. When we were growing up, when I was growing up, I mean, it was potatoes and mac and cheese and beef, and we didn't really ask questions. We didn't have the science. We just survived. I grew up in rural Quebec, and that's how it was, and a poutine here, a shepherd pie there, and it was simple. It was a very simple life. But today, people are asked about to think about holistic factors that really influences their behavior. So there's lots going on with vegetable proteins in general, lots of positive, but there are negatives too. I mean, there are things that people are concerned about when it comes to vegetable proteins at the grocery store. For example, often they think it's too expensive. 39% think it's too expensive. 39% of Canadians think it's too expensive, but prices are dropping because there's more competition. Right now in Canada, there are 25 brands selling more than $3 million wholesale. That is a lot. And we are expecting by the end of 2023 that the vegetable protein market will exceed $1 billion in Canada. Still, it's not a lot compared to what's going on with meat. I agree. With the trifecta, with the meat trifecta, with pork, chicken, and beef. But still, I mean, those numbers, that category is growing by 15 to 20% a year. So it's really a lot. And grocers won't overlook that. They have to consider it. 15 to 20% retail in food retail is a lot. So you can't really overlook that. Same in dairy as well. So there is something going on here that we need to look into. But prices are something that people will look into to address. Taste, that's a big one. I've actually worked with some manufacturers of products, of vegetable protein based products, and flavor is never a problem. To actually build a patty or a product that tastes good, you can play around with ingredients. But once you start playing around with ingredients, you have to add ingredients. So that's why a lot of people think it's ultra processed, too processed, and that's something that the industry is starting to deal with. The other thing is the texture. The texture. I don't know if you've actually tried some of these products. I've tried probably at least 20 different products over the last couple of years. Some of them are awful. And here's the thing, a lot of people's first experience will be with awful products. And so that's why there's a lot of negativity out there. A lot of people are saying, oh my God, I tasted this one product, it's awful. I'm not even going to leave meat. Meat is the best. And they're right. those products are awful, but they're slowly leaving the market too. The market is maturing and expectations are also changing as well. And so it what you thought about vegetable protein 6 months ago may not apply anymore, because the quality of products is actually improving, and it's really on texture that things are improving. And the texture, they're not trying to replicate what beef does or chicken does. What's really interesting is that vegetable proteins are becoming a category on its own without comparing. I mean, I spoke with a new company called Zuglos. So their products are everywhere in Canada since September. Their approach is absolutely awesome. This is this is a vegetable protein based products. These are vegetable protein based products. These are unique products. They're not comparing with beef. They're not comparing with chicken. It's a unique product, which was the right thing to do. And if you want something that tastes like beef or looks like beef, you're going to buy beef. And Zoglo's understood that. And there are more and more companies like that coming into the marketplace. And which is why I think on the one side, you have, animal proteins, which are becoming, it's a staple, and also the plant-based or the vegetable protein movement. But the one thing that also I think is pushing people to consider vegetable proteins is because it's innovative. It's bringing some excitement to the meat counter. With beef, I mean, when you look at innovation in beef, we haven't seen a whole lot of it. Um, I mean, the most successful innovation piece I've seen in 15 years in beef is the fact that we've actually marketed a breed called Angus to the Canadian public. A lot of Canadians actually are eating Angus uh, because they want to eat Angus, but they don't exactly know why Angus is superior or why they want Angus in the first place. And I think people were just longing for innovation. If there is one message I should convey to our livestock industries, you're gonna have to start thinking about innovating even more. Thinking. I know that that Beef Quebec in particular, I have to say, I mean, Beef Quebec is doing a really fantastic job. It's a very small industry. It's 80,000 cattle, 80,000 heads. It's very small, but they've actually embraced the value chain. So they're doing pâtés, they're developing new products that people can actually look at the grocery store with the logo of Beef Quebec. I would encourage you to look into it because their approach is fascinating and they're coming up with some really great products for the consumer to enjoy, and some of these products are unique and incredible. I've actually bought some of them and they're very, very good. They're a bit on the expensive side, but they're still very, very good. So I guess I'm just looking at the time. I'm running out of time already, unfortunately. But I would say that really looking at the future, there are some exciting things that we need to think about. First of all, uh, I think people appreciate the fact that there's more option out there, and the livestock industry shouldn't feel threatened by the fact that consumers have more option out there. It's actually going to be, I think, inviting the livestock industry to redefine their offering, to look at to value. Prices are going up, but when prices go up, as I said at the beginning, it will entice people to value what you're doing and take advantage of that as much as possible. The Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a perfect example of something that could actually get people to value your product. On the vegetable protein side, same thing. There's going to be some great things happening as well. This cohabitation is super interesting. Um, we've had the pleasure at the lab to work with our friends over at Protein Industries Canada in Saskatchewan, and I must say the things I've seen out of PIC is incredible. We're seeing more investment in prairies. We're seeing more value add. We're seeing more processing. I mean, Merit Foods, Nestle, Rocket, Lovingly in Calgary. I mean, you're seeing more investments. in the prairies that I've ever seen before in processing. And processing is so key for the prairies. It's been missing for a very long time. And because we're recognizing this fragmentation, all of a sudden we want to process more of our commodities. This is great news, and we need to celebrate that. Why? Because people are re-engaged with conversation related to proteins. It's not about, a zero-sum game or a stomach share issue. It's really about complementing different types of sources. And this is what the prairies is all about. I feel quite positive about what I've seen over the last 2 years or so. And yes, I'm a fan of pig because it is a super cluster funded by the federal government, but it's an open innovation concept. The most successful food supercluster we've had in this country is called President's Choice. But President's Choice is a closed innovation concept. Loblaws innovates for itself. And what came out of President's Choice is amazing. I mean, you got some really amazing products that have come out of Loblaws. But PIC is now is now becoming this open system which allows the entire industry to benefit from. So that's a big positive thing. So I feel quite confident that PIC will continue to do some great work in the future. And that's pretty much what I have for now. I know I've run out of time. I'll shut up, and hopefully, we'll have some questions from either Deanne or from people from the audience. Thank you very much.
Well, that's always exciting to hear from you, Sylvain, and especially a positive approach like that. Yeah, if you do have questions, again, you can type them in the chat, or if you want to, just use the raise your hand and we'll get to you and you can do it live. One question already that's come in, interesting, your observation about the impact of pets and all these new pet owners. George is asking, are these new pet owners actually feeding their pets plant or meat protein?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know. It's a valuable question. But what I'm noticing, and I don't know if you're noticing, Deanne, when I go to a grocery store, there are more grocery stores dedicating a space in their store for pet ownership. That category is just growing. And I went to a clothing store this weekend. The pet economy is exploding. I'm not sure if you knew this, but before the pandemic, the pet economy was worth about $2.5 billion in Canada. And that's growing immensely. But most important thing, I think, for all of us to understand is that dynamics are changing. When you become a pet owner, you do, because let's face it, most of us haven't grown on a farm. I worked on farms all my youth and on dairy farms, but most Canadians have never been on a farm. So the closest thing they would actually get to an animal is a pet. And to a certain extent, and I know farmers hate when I say that, but a lot of pet owners will expect farmers to treat their animals like pets. That they juxtapose their own experience to farming, and that's something we have to deal with, unfortunately. And so whenever something goes on, they will judge, they will be concerned. I mean, I know in dairy right now, there's a lot of concerns related to, some of the practices with genetics and things like that. I was exposed to that when I was a kid, so I don't see a big deal. But when you start explaining to people what dairy genetics are all about, people are going, what? What is that? Oh, okay. So that's the reality. Making the supply chain more open, more transparent, is going to change expectations.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't really want to know on everything about agriculture. Or maybe they shouldn't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
we've got lots of discussion or following up on your points about value added. One thing is Alex is asking, what can governments do to spur value added processing? But that Ken is saying maybe we're getting too focused on value adding as farmers and then aren't supporting enough farm level
Farmers.
innovation. So there's kind of two sides to that coin. Do you want to address that a little?
Actually, no, it's a great question. And in fact, last week at the Prairie Cereal Summit, it came up as well. I had a room filled with farmers, and I did talk about processing. The reason why I'm a big fan of processing is that it's the easiest thing to do to support farmers. Uh, Look at beef right now. We have 3 plants in Canada processing most of the federally licensed beef we have in Canada. We have GBS, Cargill, and I River, and Better Beef in Guelph. That concentration really is hurting farmers. Farmers aren't getting, so beef prices are going way up, but farmers aren't getting more. So the more you focus on processing, that anchor piece of the supply chain, the easier it gets to support farmers. And I cannot emphasize enough on that point. We've lost 30,000 jobs in food manufacturing in the last 5 years in Canada, and we were continuing to lose until the pandemic. And since the pandemic, we're seeing more nearshoring, more onshoring happening. Kraft Heinz is investing in Montreal. I mean, there are so many examples of things happening right now, positive things, that the more you see that, the easier it gets. So Kraft Heinz, just to give you an example, Kraft Heinz in Montreal is committed now to buy Canadian tomatoes. Well, who grows those tomatoes? Farmers. So instead of actually buying, selling tomato paste, sending it overseas and then buy back in a bottle, we've done that so many times. So the emphasis is good, and we need to continue to do that.
But then how do you ensure that on-farm research levels, so we get better varieties and support the protein plant industries, doesn't get overlooked? I think that's where Ken was coming from. And like you're saying, processing does lead to that. But how do you make
Yep.
sure that there isn't that time gap in losing on some of those ends of things?
Oh, no, absolutely. So I work with the University of Calgary with the Creative Destruction Lab over there. They have an agri-food sector, so I mentor startups. A lot of them are in gene editing, for example. I mean, you need investors, you need investment to support farmers using new technologies. And so right now we're mentoring 3 companies out of the University of Calgary with the CDL, and some amazing stuff are happening. I mean, and it takes time. It takes time. And what's going on right now is that you have more and more investors, VCs, that are that do get agri-food. You need to be patient. It's not let's actually invest a couple of millions and then get out a few years later. That's not how agri-food works. And so the more you see that, the more you'll see farmers being better supported. I was actually in the prairies when Macau happened. I mean, it was just awful. Farmers were left on their own. I don't think it's the case anymore. I mean, right now there's more private money looking at agri-food because of what's happening around the world right now.
Mhm. All right, Chris Jones says, well, it's shocking your fact that pork has only gone up 5%. You sure wouldn't know that by buying bacon. And I guess,
No,
we
bacon
often
is
hear
different.
about,
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a fan of bacon. It's $1 a slice now.
how do we do it? But sometimes there does seem to be that disconnect. And does it go back to that competition factor, or, the retail price and what the farmers get? That's always a bone of contention.
So yeah, so with livestock, so I've been asked, like, I think since last week with the Canada Super Price Report, I think I've been asked 50 times whether or not grocers are gouging consumers. And I've been looking at, EBITDAs are basically the same. I mean, if you look at 2019, 2020, and 21 so far, so like in Loblaw's case, they only have 3 quarters in. Uh, the EBITDA is pretty much the same. The ratios are the same. So I do think something's going on upstream. You probably saw on the weekend in Washington this new report suggesting that the top 4 meat processors, their profits have gone up 300% since the beginning of the pandemic. 300%. That is a lot of money. And I wish in Canada we would have that kind of investigative work to look into what's going on there. So I'm a big fan of processing, but there's a bit of a black box issue going on there. And I would love to get some answers. So that point is well taken.
There's about 5 minutes left for Q&A.
Okay. And that is a point as well. When you see numbers like that, 300%, I mean, the government starts to sit up and take notice, and there's
well, look at the bread cartels issue, Deanne.
Yeah.
I mean, the bread cart. So the bread price fixing scheme went on for 14 years in this country. Loblaw admitted that it was actually colluding along with Western bakeries. That was back in 2017. The investigation started in 2015, 6 years ago, and the investigation is still ongoing. Like, seriously, come on. We have a problem in Canada for sure when it comes to these things. So I'm not suggesting that the agri-food sector, there's a lot of bad blood or people that are behaving badly, but you need one company to ruin it all for everyone.
Yeah, and then that goes back to less competition.
Exactly.
More likely to happen.
And frankly, Western Bakeries was sold this year to another baker in Canada. So more consolidation. And that's why if you want more support for farmers, you absolutely need more processing, more options as much as possible.
All right, one other question that's come in here is government safety policy seems to be more directed to and favor large processors. And so how do we advocate for reasonable policy that will support smaller operations? Smaller operations don't have that economy of scale to spread it over. So how can we advocate and support some of those innovators coming up and still needing to abide by those same safety policies?
Who asked that question?
Ken.
Ken? I don't know. I think I know Ken, but Ken knows what he's talking about. I've seen many small outfits go bankrupt as a result of some ridiculous recall. They had to comply to certain rules that really make sense for bigger players like Maple Leaf, for example, or McCain. It's a disgrace in Canada, and I'm actually on the National Scientific Advisory Board of the CFIA, and I always bring up this point that SMEs are not well supported. Even with provinces, provincially licensed facilities are not well supported in this country, and we tend to kill a mosquito with a bazooka all the time with SMEs. And I think there's been some progress in some provinces. I know that here in the Atlantic, the approach has changed a little bit, but I'm not sure about other places. I actually think there's a lot of work to be done.
Huh. Now, sorry, when you say SMEs, you're referring to?
Small and medium-sized businesses.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
Ken laughs and says, sorry, it was an accident. That he looks like he knows what he's talking about. Is that what you mean, Ken? Anyway. All right, I'll give one last call. If anyone has a question, we'll give you one last call before we let Sylvain go on. I know he's got a couple more presentations today. And so, like I say,
this is a good start to the day.
I liked your idea of that sort of protein democracy. I think that's got a lot of merit, and it kind of helps us take a different spin on it not being competition, but to rise to the value add challenge.
Absolutely. Because I mean, let's face it, often when we think about farm gate economics, we tend to fall into the stomach share mentality. As I mentioned earlier, we tend to see food as a zero-sum game. If I get into consumer stomachs, the other guy won't. it doesn't work that way anymore, especially with the inflation going on now and people valuing food differently. We have a different set of rules now altogether. And so this is about feeding Canadians, but in all sorts of ways. And so that's why I think I actually see a bright future for the livestock industry as much as for vegetable protein based products as well. I just think it's been misunderstood for quite a long time. And I actually think if you want to innovate and generate growth for the industry, you have to get rid of that stomach share mentality as much as possible.
And you talked about some innovative Quebec products. Do you have some examples of some of the Quebec beef ones?
Yeah, there's so yes, I was afraid to mention anything, but there's one product that caught my attention. It's called CIPAT. It's CIPATE. It's a Quebec dish. Actually, it's a traditional dish. It's made with different types of meat. There's chicken, there's pork, and beef. And Beef Quebec actually just took it upon the group took it upon them to actually design this product with Quebec beef. And I actually bought one this summer, and it was super tasty. And I was we're a family of 6, so I had to buy 2. They were $20 each, but it was unbelievable. And so when you think about beef, for example, think about the end product and how you can vertically integrate to value your commodity and make it into a novelty for the consumer.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
That's just one example.
So it's kind of a tortilla then product with the combination?
Sort of. Yeah, sort of. But there's actually some vegetables inside. So it's a mixture of different things. It's very tasty. Yeah. I should send you one, actually.
Sounds good.
So while we wrap up here, I'm going to throw up the CCA credit. Everybody with a phone just needs to scan it with a QR code. If you lost video and can't get the QR code, please put your name in chat and we will write you down. There is a sheet below this QR code for those who can't scan it. So we can, that way nobody has to miss out on getting this CCA credit.
Great. Thank you, Sean, for that update. And you can, of course, get credits towards your certified crop advisor from this particular session. So with that, Dr. Sylvain, we'll let you go. I mean, and again, we can catch you on the podcast. How often are those coming out? Monthly, weekly, bi-weekly?
Bi-weekly, and so we post it on social media, and it's available on Google, Apple, Spotify, and Simplecast.
Okay, we'll catch you there. Look forward to hearing you again. Thanks for sharing with us today. Have a great day.
Take care. Happy holidays.
Yes.
Bye-bye.